The night was alive with energy, and Vine decided to test the waters with her usually aloof husband. She adjusted the silver bangles on her wrists, then glanced over at Jungkook, who was lounging on the sofa, a book in his hands. As usual, his attention was buried in it, expression unreadable, even as he occasionally sipped from a cup of tea beside him. Determined to break through his carefully crafted wall, Vine went over, her steps deliberately louder than usual. Jungkook glanced up, his eyes flickering briefly with surprise before they settled back into his familiar, neutral expression. Vine, what are you reading? She asked, plopping down beside him, closer than necessary. He shifted, clearly caught off guard, but he answered smoothly. Jungkook, a history of. It's about ancient warfare strategies. She raised an eyebrow, lips curling in amusement. Vine, warfare strategies must be exciting. Does it cover the battles you're fighting against conversation? Jungkook's lips twitched, almost a smile. Jungkook, you think I'm bad at conversation? Fine, absolutely, she replied with a grin. You would be hopeless in a debate. Too serious. I mean, look at you. You're like the perfect military officer, even in his own living room. She gestured to his perfectly organized tea tray and neatly pressed t shirt. Jungkook, oh, and what would you have me do then? Dress like a rogue, lounge about carelessly? Fine. Maybe I'd start with loosening that collar a little. You know, something to hint you're not all business. She reached over, her fingers brushing his collar in a daring gesture, catching the scent of his cologne. To her surprise, he didn't pull back. Instead, he tilted his head, eyebrow raised as if intrigued. Jungkook, maybe I just haven't met the right person to inspire that side of me, he replied, his voice dripping to a murmur, his eyes never leaving hers. She grinned, thrilled by his sudden shift. Wine. Are you saying I'm not that person? Because I'll have you know, I'm an expert in inspiring fun. I bet I could have you out of that serious shell in under 5 minutes. He gave her a skeptical look. Wine. Really? And how would you accomplish that? Fine. Simple. She stood up, crossing her arms with a mock serious expression. A game. You have to follow whatever dare I give you, and I will do the same with yours. Deal? He studied her, his lips curving into the faintest smirk. Jungkook, I never learned how to back down. Go on. What's my first dare? She barely had to think about it, grinning wickedly. You have to dance with me. Jungkook blinked, caught completely off guard. Dance? Fine, yes. Unless the fearless military strategist is afraid. She challenged, raising an eyebrow. He rolled his eyes, chuckling softly, but got to his feet, offering his hand with unexpected flair. Jungkook, all right, but don't blame me if I'm better at winning the battles than winning around this room. Vine, before accepting his hand, said, Wait, wait for me just for a second. She said and started walking away. Jungkook, where are you going? Are you already afraid? He asked, but she didn't reply, which made him chuckle. He sat down again and continued reading his book. After a few minutes, Vine entered the room again while adjusting her sari. Beneath the delicate fabric, a slim golden waist chain rested against her skin, glinting every time she moved. She had chosen it thoughtfully, hoping it might evoke a reaction, even if just a flicker from her husband. Jungkook, reading his book, looked up as she approached. His gaze was as unreadable as ever, his expression carved from stone. His dark eyes briefly met hers before returning to his book, yet Vine caught the way they skimmed down her figure. She could tell he noticed, but as always, he hid it well. Deciding to push his stoic mask just a little further, she reached for a glass on the side table, moving slowly, and the waist chain gave a delicate shimmer. It was subtle, but in the silence it was enough to catch his attention once more. This time he didn't look away so easily. His gaze traced the line of the chain against her skin. He got up slowly, the softest rustle of his movements slicing through the quiet. He moved closer, so close she could feel his warmth, and his hand reached out, tracing just above the line of her waist chain, his fingers nearly grazing her skin. Jungkook, is this new? His voice was low, rougher than she had ever heard, each word a slow drawl that sent a shiver down her spine. Vine managed a nod. Her breath caught somewhere between surprise and anticipation. Jungkook's hand finally rested on her waist, fingers tracing the delicate chain, as though he were trying to memorize every curve, every line. The intensity in his gaze softened, replaced by something almost hungry. His fingers tightened ever so slightly on her waist, his lips curving in the faintest of smirks as he leaned closer, his voice a seductive whisper. Jungkook, you knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? In that moment, she knew she had succeeded in igniting something dormant within him, something no icy demeanor could contain. Jungkook leaned in closer, his thumb brushing along the chain's golden links, with a touch far softer than she had expected from him. The subtle chains, as it moved, sent a thrill through her, and his intense gaze was now fixed solely on her, as though he had discovered an entirely new side of her he couldn't quite resist. Fine, maybe, but here I thought nothing could ever break your focus. His lips pulling into that barely there smirk she rarely saw, and even more rarely this close. Jungkook, you are more distracting than you know, he murmured, his hand skimming along her side. Vine took his hand, pulling him into the center of the room. She turned on some music, a playful tune with a slow tempo, and they moved awkwardly at first, laughing when they stumbled. Jungkook was stiff, but as she urged him on, he gradually loosened up, following her movements with surprising grace. There was laughter and the occasional twirl gone wrong, but she noticed the light in his eyes, a genuine enjoyment she hadn't seen before. They spun and laughed until they were out of breath, collapsing onto the sofa in a fit of giggles. For the first time, Jungkook seemed carefree, his usual guarded expression nowhere to be seen. Vine grinned, leaning back and catching her breath. Vine, see, you do know how to have fun. Who knew? He shook his head, still smiling. Jungkook, fun? Don't be ridiculous. She nudged him playfully. Then you'd better watch out. I'm just getting started. As their laughter faded, he looked at her, his gaze softer, warmer than she had ever seen. Jungkook, good. I think I could get used to this. He caught the change, his eyes softening as he lifted a finger, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his thumb tracing the delicate skin of her cheek. Jungkook, you think I don't notice how you try to get my attention? All these little tricks? His fingers tapped gently against the chain again, sending another small jingle through the air. Vine's cheeks colored, caught off guard by his sudden gesture. She tried to play it off, lifting her chin defiantly. Vine, I just wanted to see if you had noticed me for once. Jungkook's gaze softened even more, and he let out a quiet, almost incredulous chuckle. Jungkook, believe me, I notice, Vine. I notice every time you smile, every time you look my way. He pulled her just a fraction closer, his face so near to hers that she could feel his breath warm against her cheek. Jungkook, but you don't know the effect you have on me. I'm only cold to keep myself in check. His words held a weight, an intensity that took her by surprise, and her own resolve began to waver. But she couldn't help herself, couldn't resist challenging him further. Wine. Oh, really? Then what's stopping you from losing control now? Jungkook's hand stilled, his gaze darkening as he searched her face, as if to confirm whatever she meant, whether she meant every word. Without another word, he dipped his head, brushing his lips just above the line of her waist, his breath warm against her skin as his fingers traced the path of her chain. Jungkook, I was going to be a gentleman, but you don't want to make it easy, do you? Vine's laugh was soft, genuine, and for once free of the barriers she had kept up around him. Vine, since when did you want easy? She teased, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his shoulder. Jungkook chuckled, a low, rich sound that vibrated against her, his fingers sliding up to cup her face gently as he leaned in, their fingers barely a breath apart. Jungkook, fine, Vine, you win. It's getting uncontrollable for me too, he said and kissed her roughly on the lips. Each movement of their lips was intense and raw. His hands slid firmly around her waist, pulling her against him, while her fingers tangled in his hair, both of them lost in the fire they could no longer resist.